Hello everyone, welcome to my latest vlog. I hope everybody's hanging in there in these incredibly chaotic and uncertain times. I think the most chaotic that I've actually ever witnessed in this part of the world, i.e., North America. Today I want to talk about humanitarian aid and humanitarianism, something that I've been putting off as a topic for the last few vlogs because of obviously everything that's going on and how it's overwhelmed, I think, the discussion. But today I'd like to bring us back more into focus on the issues that actually do matter the most. And that is how our systems and structures have morphed into the years over the years and turned global development and humanitarian assistance into something that it was never meant to be, nor should it have been. So while we are contemplating an entire different strategy at the moment because of what's going on, I think we also need to not lose sight of the fact that we still uh, don't know where we stand as global development and humanitarian practitioners, policymakers, and workers. So I ended my last vlog on a very, very personal experience that I underwent many years ago in the humanitarian sector. And it was a very, very small, very, very minor little anecdote that I went through when during the 2005 Kashmir earthquake in Pakistan in the northern areas that really devastated that part of the country. And I was in UNICEF in those days working on the relief efforts in Islamabad, and I got a phone call from one of our prior, now retired domestic helpers who brought me up as a child and now lived in one of the earthquake affected areas. And he had just lost his son, whose body he was pulling out of the rubble. And he had finally managed to connect to me in Islamabad because the telephone and mobile networks had all gone down, and we didn't know where he was. We didn't know if he was alive. And suddenly I get this call while I'm at UNICEF, and it was so overwhelming. And he was bawling and he was in tears, and he goes, "My son has died and everything's destroyed, and I'm okay, but my son is gone." And I couldn't hear him. The line wasn't very clear, obviously. And so I was also speaking in a loud, very emotionally charged voice, asking him, "Are you okay, Manzoor? Are you okay? What is happening?" And one of the white expats who had flown into Pakistan to take part in the relief efforts comes up to me and says, "Shh, can you keep it down, please? So and so, I don't know, I can't remember who it was, is recording an interview with the BBC in the next room." And that really threw me off because I was so involved in my own emotion in terms of, finally reconnecting with a near family member who I realized was alive. To be shushed by somebody who is like, "We're recording an interview with the BBC. This is our priority." And for me, that sums up the world of humanitarian assistance very, very aptly. Now, I know people say you can't generalize this, that there are definitely genuine people who may not act in this way, or if they do act in this way, they're doing it because this is their job, this is what they're meant to do. But for me, this illustrates a very, very important difference, which I've been trying to highlight in my writings on the aspect issue of humanitarian aid and humanitarianism, is that there is a vast difference between this global international conglomerate that we call humanitarian aid and the idea of what humanitarianism means to people in the countries that are actually affected by whatever catastrophe that may be falling us, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a conflict, whether it's a war, what have you. Is that for us, there are two things. There's one is that this is something that has happened to our country and our country, the people of our country. And so we feel emotionally the closest to those who have been affected. We may not all be able to do something about it, each and every citizen in a country, but we are all genuinely affected by it, whether we accept it or not. And the second thing is that it is actually people like us, me accepted, I'm not including myself in it necessarily, but it is our own people who are what you in your world call first responders, um, who are the people who are first on the scene to help. And what the world of humanitarian assistance has done, so that's all the UNICEFs of the world, the USAIDs of the world, the ICRCs of the world, everybody who comes in to quote unquote help during that humanitarian catastrophe or event, is so far removed in so many ways because they see their work as largely their work, as largely administrative, as largely, a very cut and paste cookie cutter situation. Like when I was in UNICEF, I was also working in the comms section with an expatriate lady who had flown in from the UK and used to head UNICEF's comm division. And it was all about branding, for instance, that in the earthquake affected areas, any piece of relief that goes in has to be UNICEF branded. So we have to have that logo front and center. I don't care whether it's on tents. I don't care whether it's on bags of rice or flour. I don't care whether it's on tarps or, medical aid that's going in. UNICEF has to be there. That was the message. And that was just, excuse me, that was just UNICEF. Then every other aid organization had its own. I actually never was able to go directly into the affected areas myself. So this is not an eyewitness account, but many, many Pakistanis who did go into those areas, not with UNICEF or other aid agencies, but who went in as individuals, as Pakistanis, to help the affected, had stories to tell that I really can't doubt. There were stories that, the affected area was just littered with there was UNICEF in one area, there was UNDP in one area, there was WFP in one area, there was USAID in one area. Like all these individual aid camps had been set up. Everybody was pretty much doing their own thing. It was crawling with expatriates. Like every week flights, choppers would fly in with a new batch of expatriates. And I knew that because people from UNICEF were flying in and out constantly, and I was monitoring their movements. I had to. That was part of the work that I was doing, sitting in their offices in Islamabad. And that they were having parties in tents in the evenings. And, meantime, there were people who were completely displaced, houses demolished. And this is a very remote, a very underprivileged part of the country. And in the meantime, there were all these little bits and pieces happening which seemed extremely disconnected from the work at hand, the actual issue at hand. And that disconnection showed. It showed a lot to Pakistanis themselves who were using their own resources, their own funds to go in and do whatever it is they could. And so that disconnect, I think, is something that global humanitarian staff don't see from their organizations. Their job is there's an event somewhere, a whole bunch of us fly into that country for a set period of time. This is the checklist. This is what we have to do. We do it, we get out, and we go to the next site. Meantime, it is the citizens of that country that have to actually rebuild. And yeah, rebuilding is a different situation altogether, right? When time comes to rebuild, and then of course the money starts pouring in, and the World Bank says, and that happened in that region as well. I mean, everybody came in to rebuild the devastated areas, and there was a lot of foreign funding coming in. There was a lot of corruption as well because we were managing it as a government, the Pakistani government, and it was a bit of a mishmash of everything. But my point here is that the idea of humanitarianism, which emanates in every country, whether it's North America or whether it's South Asia, whether it's somewhere in Africa, every country has its own history of humanitarianism. And the humanitarian aid industry comes in and completely walks pretty much all over it when there's an event and wants to take over and overwhelms it and wants all the credit for it. I remember when Pakistan underwent its floods, this is about 3 years ago, the devastating floods that inundated one third of the country underwater, displaced over 30 million people, right? And you needed boats to get into the affected area. There was absolutely no other access. We begged the world, we need your help. And Samantha Power came in. There's USAID again, and she took a helicopter ride with our prime minister, looking over the flooded areas from the sky and promised that there'll be a lot of aid coming in. And I don't think a lot of that aid actually did come in. A lot of it was show. And I made a point to bring that out as a case study in whatever presentation I did in different places about the fact that the one time we actually really did need external support, it actually wasn't there to the level and extent that it had been in the past. I don't know why. There was at that point the humanitarian sector, aid sector, was overwhelmed with the amount of catastrophes and conflicts happening around the world. Humanitarian aid is not fit for purpose. That discussion was going on, and there's just not enough money to go around. That was going on. And so, the floods in Pakistan, the most devastating we've had in our entire history, were just not important enough. But who stepped up? It was our people. And I know because I was also helping from Karachi as much as I could. I mean, the city was littered with camps where people were like, give donations, we'll go and do it. People were like renting boats from fishermen in the coastal areas and going in at their own risk. Our people were so involved. It was amazing to see. And then I had people from humanitarian agencies come up to me and say, but we were there. We were there. Please don't say we weren't. But again, that struck me as in this is not about your visibility or about giving you credit for being there. This is about an event that has just occurred and that everybody should try and do whatever they can to help instead of saying that, oh no, we are the best, we are the biggest, we provide the most. Because at the end of the day, when you look at numbers and figures and evaluations, it's about who provided the most. It's not about who actually dedicated their lives to it. And Pakistanis dedicated themselves to it. We weren't able to do much. It was really such an overwhelming catastrophe for us that even us as individuals or as group sponsors or as corporates couldn't do too much. Eventually, the waters receded. People went back to their devastated lands. We lost so much agricultural lands. But everything's bounced back now. But of course, who came in at the end? The World Bank came in at the end for rebuilding. And of course, it went to the provincial governments. And not much has happened there. A lot of rebuilding happened through donations. People were, literally trying to rebuild their villages one house at a time. But of course, everybody wants credit for overall rebuilding at the end of the day, right? So for me, the idea of humanitarian aid as being something that we cannot question because it is humanitarian aid and humanitarianism is something that I think is very unfair because the humanitarian aid industry is an industry and it's part of the same industry that we're talking about here, foreign aid, right? I've always said in my previous vlogs and before as well, you have to make a distinction between development aid and humanitarian aid because they are two very different things. You can do without development aid. You probably can't do without humanitarian aid. Also, humanitarian aid is about helping people. Okay, I'm not talking about saviorism here, but humanitarianism and humanitarian aid is about helping people in their greatest time of need. But yet we've made an industry out of that as well. And so for me, everything that's happening now as well, and here we go, the USAID freeze makes yet another appearance, but I'm going to keep it very brief here, is the fact that if you even have a monopoly on humanitarian aid, which is what USAID does, to the extent that if you completely end that aid, you put in jeopardy so many lives, that's a problem. That's one problem is that, okay, I'm running out of time. Unfortunately, YouTube and LinkedIn don't allow me to record videos longer than 15 minutes. I don't have any paid platform for this. So I'll just end. We need to dig deeper when we talk about humanitarianism in countries that is completely overlooked and overwhelmed and co-opted by the humanitarian aid industry. And we need to look at the humanitarian aid industry as an industry as well. Otherwise, we will never get to the core of what humanitarianism actually means. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.